Welcome back to Green Thumb Gardening Secrets. Today we're going to talk about reasons to grow cover crops and the 6 super compelling reasons just for air and water alone. Can't wait to get started. Let's get going. First, let's talk about what. Cover crops, as you see here, just like the name implies, cover the soil. They blanket the soil, they protect the soil. When the soil would otherwise be bare in areas of the garden where there aren't food crops or between widely spaced food crops. They're also an acknowledgement that we can do better, and there's a better option than leaving our soil bare for 6 to 9 months of the year. But why grow them? There are at least 20 reasons to grow cover crops, but today we're going to talk about just the 6 that pertain to air and water. These 6 are super important, and their impacts are wide-reaching for our gardens and farms and neighbors, affecting everything from how compact or loose our soil is to how much water it holds and how we impact surrounding bodies of water. Number 1, cover crops protect against compaction and erosion. Let's look at some bare soil. As water hits bare soil, you can imagine it here. I mean, how heavy is a water droplet? You can imagine water hitting and water droplets hitting. As water comes and hits, imagine pouring BBs onto soil. Every single drop hits with such force, it can splash water up to 6 feet in every direction, or splash soil up to 6 feet in every direction. And think of that weight just for compaction. It's like a multitude of millions of tiny BBs being poured on your soil. After just a little bit, you'll see compacted soil where it forms it's so compacted, you see this, it's like a crust on top just from compaction. This is compacted soil on top. I just pulled it off here's spots even through the cover crop. These little compacted, and over the season, it will make this entire area, if it's bare, and over the off season too, more like cement than soil. Let me see if I can find an area that is, here you go. You can actually see the divots in the soil from water, just in the space between the oats. That's with some cover crop on. You can see right here, same thing, some erosion and what's left, just even with the cover crop on. And that's one of the downsides of oats, is that it will leave some spaces. We wanted this because it winter kills, so it's easy to plant in the spring, but it doesn't leave as dense a covering. And even with the cover crop on, you see that. Imagine that as completely bare soil. And once that soil gets sprayed apart, it becomes much more susceptible to erosion. And then also water on bare soil flows very quickly, and the faster it flows, the more it can carry. Water flowing fast enough can carry boulders. It definitely can carry our soil away. And what's worse, we lose our topsoil. We don't lose our subsoil that's 6 inches or a foot or 2 feet down, some places maybe even 4 feet down. We lose our topsoil first, which has our richest, most organically rich soil, richest in organic matter, richest in nutrients. So cover crops, what they do instead, imagine rain hitting this area here. It's so dense. Think of this, it hitting here, it has to go in. It doesn't hit soil. It hits all of these stems and all of these leaves and all of the stubble underneath. And so it goes down to the soil in gentle trickles and drips. And once it gets down to the soil, so it doesn't compact it. And then once it gets down to the soil, it slowly, all the stubbles and all these little stems, it's the water sheet flow over the surface. And so the water's going so slow, it just can't pick up as much soil to erode it. So it protects our soil against compaction and erosion. Even more, it actually loosens our soil. So think of all of these roots and all the earthworms, beetles, etc. that these cover crops provide habitat for. As the roots and the earthworms and the beetles, etc. make their way through the soil, they gently nudge it upward and loosen it. You walk in soil, and I don't recommend walking in and trampling it, but if you do take a step into it, you can tell it's entirely different than bare soil. It's spongy and you'll sink into it. It's a wonderfully loosened soil. The third reason having to do with water and air, it increases air and water infiltration. Water flowing more slowly over the surface is more likely to go down into the soil. You can see sometimes if on bare soil, if you pour water on it, it just will sheet right off the surface. If you dig down a little bit, it's just completely dry. But water that moves slowly over the surface has much greater chance to seep down into the soil. Also, all of the decaying roots, the earthworm holes, the beetle holes, they create all these macropores in the soil that also increase air and water infiltration in the soil. And air infiltration is super important in our soil. The third way that increases air and water infiltration has to do with something called glomalin. So let me grab some soil here that came out of a different part of our yard. And it came in here on a tarp, and let me grab a little bit of it's in amongst these leaves. This soil, this is a chunk that fell off a tarp that we had up here. And you can see there's not a lot of organic matter in it. And the soil is it's not sand, it's soil, but it functions more like sand on a beach. And let's go over and take a handful of this and compare it to good soil. And let me actually also come down here and get another handful of really good soil. Another good spot of the garden here. Get a handful of good soil. Now, this isn't our absolutely best soil, but it's much better than this. This soil that functions more like sand, it doesn't have a lot of glomalin. Even if I made this moist, it would do the same thing it's doing now. The only pore spaces it has in there are what's in between the particles as they settle together. They're just regularly sized particles and they just settle together. And it just crumbles in your fingers and falls through. And if you had to get it wet, it wouldn't even do much. This isn't doing this just because it's wet, although that is part of keeping everything in there healthy. Crumbled, the spaces in this soil, I crumble this, and it comes into these irregularly sized particles. And actually, you can see some of the organic life in it right there. Something you can actually see. Those larger, irregularly sized particles make for much bigger pore space. And what glues them into those larger, irregularly sized particles is something called glomalin. And glomalin is produced by the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi that live in partner with so many of our garden plants, so many of our plants in general live in conjunction with their roots. And the little hyphae of the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi are coated with glomalin. And it functions to protect them and their relationships and their really beneficial symbiotic relationships with all of our plants. And it also glues the soil together. After it's done its job of protecting the hyphae, it will last in the soil for 40 years or more. That is the key. These soil aggregates are the key to making healthy soil. So even after the mycorrhizal fungi are done, they leave us with glomalin that gives us the aggregates that make super healthy soil. It's part of the organic matter that it's in super healthy soil. The fourth reason is it increases water holding capacity. Larger irregularly shaped particles make larger irregularly shaped pores that are just much bigger. So there's just so much more space in the soil for water to absorb into. So that slowly moving water of the soil has a place to go. 50% of the volume of a soil in healthy soil is pore space. In unhealthy soil and compacted soil, it's still 30%, which is amazingly large. But in healthy soil, it's 50%. So the more we can foster that, the better it is. And anybody who's ever looked at their soil knows what healthy soil looks like. This is kind of explaining, oh, that's why. It has these good aggregate structure with lots of organic matter. A lot of that is glomalin that gives us pore space in our soil, nice and loose and friable. Plus, organic matter itself, this organic matter, as it decays and stays in the soil and becomes humus, organic matter in the soil can hold almost its weight in water. So cover crops help increase soil's water holding capacity. So this isn't a good example anymore because these are dead. Let me go over to the other side. So cover crops, and yes, they are using some of the soil moisture. Not only are they, because of increased water infiltration and increased pore space, having a lot more water in the soil to begin with, and you can see if this is very perfectly moist soil under here, if you could take a look at it, but the shade that they provide, even after they die, like over on that other bed, the shade that they provides a living mulch that vastly decreases the amount of evaporation that's happening in the soil and keeps our soil nice and evenly moist. You can see under your plants, foliage in your garden, how they shade the soil and it keeps the soil moist. Soil that is directly hit by the sun's rays evaporates at an amazing rate, and keeping it shaded keeps that soil nice and evenly moist, protecting that water to seep down in and be there and ready as a supply for our plants when we garden. Finally, for water and air, cover crops decrease runoff. We can see how it's slowing the water down. Because they decrease the amount of runoff, they vastly increase our water quality. That's soil running off, and you see silt-laden streams, bad for trout, bad for all sorts of aquatic life. Fertilizers, pesticides, fungicides that kill some aquatic life and also foster other aquatic life, which further degrades, algae blooms and you name it, that further degrades aquatic habitats. So the final reasons for air and water is that it increases our water quality. Well, that's it for this episode, but there's at least 14 other reasons that are all just as important for our gardens and farms. So check out our previous episode on cover crops' effects on soil nutrients, and stay tuned for upcoming episodes on how cover crops can help with weed disease and pest control, increasing productions of our main crops, our peace of mind, and our pocketbook. And until next time, stay open to growing. You can find more on this topic and others on my website. I'll leave a link in the description below. Like this video if you liked it. Likes really help us out. Leave a question or comment below. I personally answer each one, and subscribe to get all of our future videos. And if social media is your jam, feel free to follow us on Twitter and Instagram for more green thumb gardening secrets, tips, and tricks. They have really no insect damage. Maybe we've put nothing on them.